expanding Operation Atalanta in Somalia. The EU has authorised its ships and helicopters to carry out missions inside the country to fight pirates. But what are the risks of this new strategy? Could it really put an end to Somali-based piracy, or would it further complicate the situation in the country? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. In a major move in the fight against piracy in Somalia, the EU has agreed to expand its so-called Atalanta mission by allowing its forces to attack on land as well as at sea. The area of operation will now include land along Somalia's coastline. It had already covered Somalia's territorial and internal waters. The expanded mission also gives EU forces the power to attack from the sea or air. But EU officials insist that no ground troops will be deployed. The European Union recently extended its anti-piracy mission to run until the end of 2014 at a cost of around $20 million.
This is a really important mission, the European Union coming together to tackle the real problem of piracy on the high seas, and also the comprehensive approach to supporting the people of Somalia into a better future.
So, is expanding the Atalanta mission enough to end piracy in Somalia? To discuss the issue, we're joined by our three guests today. From Nairobi, we have Yusuf Omar Al-Azhari, a former political advisor to the President of Somalia. He's also a former ambassador to the US. From London, we're joined by Will Geddes, the Managing Director of International Corporate Protection, a threat assessment and management company based in London. And here in Doha, we have Afyare Elmi, a Professor of International Affairs at Qatar University. Will Geddes, what do you make of this expansion of Operation Atalanta? Is it the right way forward?
I think it was somewhat inevitable, Adrian, and I think this evolution is an excellent step towards countering this prevalent and ongoing threat. The issue of Somalia piracy is so extensive and continues to be so that it's incurring significant costs not only into the shipping and commercial routes, obviously, that neighbour its waters, but also in terms of all the peripheral expenses which are beginning to incur, particularly from the hostage taking and also from the vessels needing to be recovered and the associated insurances. So this is something which is about time and it needed to be done.
Afyare Elmi, is this going to impact upon the pirates' ability to operate?
Well, I doubt very much. First of all, I still think that the whole approach is based on offshore, basically, and I find that as an ineffective way and also inefficient way of addressing the piracy issue in Somalia. And after all, also this is not comprehensive in the sense that it does not address the illegal fishing and also the toxic waste dumping, which Somalis consider piracy as well.
Yusuf Omar Al-Azhari, what do you make of what you've heard so far? On which side of the fence do you stand?
Well, I think that the decision of the foreign ministers of the EU to extend the operation into a territorial water of Somalia and beyond is long overdue. I think this should have been done long time ago, because with all the justification that the first fishermen had in the beginning, now the pirates have been joined by renegades, people who think that they can benefit easily by ransom. And therefore, these are not the fishermen who are really hijacking the ships and who are killing people. These are murderers, and they should be fought both inside the country as well as outside the country.
Okay. Well, look, there's been a lot of discussion on how to deal with piracy in Somalia, and the EU's latest decision is just one of many initiatives by Western governments. So what's behind the problem? Well, as you heard just a moment or two ago, it turns out that it all began when local fishermen had their livelihoods effectively ruined. Al Jazeera's Tariq Bazli reports.
The government in Somalia collapsed more than 20 years ago when civil war broke out. International fishing fleets quickly moved in during the chaos and decimated fish stocks. Local fishermen were ruined. It got worse. The operators of European ships were accused of dumping nuclear waste in the surrounding waters. Somali fishermen had had enough. They took some weapons and demanded that foreign crews pay a tax. And that's how piracy started. By 2008, the number of attacks in the Gulf of Aden had risen to more than 120 a year, bringing in a reported $100 million. The pirates had their biggest haul in early 2010 when they hijacked a South Korean supertanker in the Indian Ocean. They released it after they secured a record ransom of almost $13 million. Analysts argue that the lack of a stable government, famine and armed rebels all contribute to piracy's success. Trying to cure the symptoms, they say, rather than treat the cause, only means that Somali waters will remain the most dangerous in the world. Tarek Basley, Inside Story.
All right, let's get back to our guests. Will Geddes in London. The battle against piracy, it could be argued, is being won. There were far fewer attacks in Somali coastal waters last year. The pirates being forced to ply their trade, if you can call it that, much further offshore and to take more risks. Was this EU initiative really necessary?
Yeah, absolutely, without question. Again, you state some very good points there. Last year, there were approximately 30 ships that had been hijacked and held, and approximately about 700 hostages. This year, we have about 8 ships being held and about 200 hostages. However, there are a number of other dynamics which are beginning to start to play more extensively in the pirates' activities. You know, there's been some very significant revenue generations from some of the ransoms that have been settled, and that Al-Shabab, who have now very directly linked themselves into Al-Qaeda, have a very important part to play in that pirate effort, and they're taking, in some respects, and reportedly, 50% of some of the ransoms being paid. So what we're seeing here is not a sort of ramshackle bunch of pirates that have managed to corner an industry, if you like, but you also have a direct correlation to terrorism. So there are some greater and bigger problems that we have to look at in eradicating, and this process, and certainly this ruling now by the EU, is going to improve in trying to surgically strike at the pirates' operations, and particularly weapons caches and their resources.
All right, you raised some issues there that we want to discuss further with our guests. Afyare Elmi, to what extent may this initiative by the EU now merely force the pirates to change tactics once again? Do you fear that we're likely to see more of the kind of land-based attacks and kidnapping of tourists like Judith Tebbit, who was recently released?
Well, if you look back, piracy was a cyclical thing. At one time it just went up, other times it declined. If you go back in 2006, when the courts controlled most of the southern Somalia, it has significantly declined, and then it re-emerged again. So, I mean, this cyclical thing, it just comes and goes. That is not the thing that I'm interested in looking at. If you look at the conditions that have produced it in the first place, then they still persist. And here, when you look at the policy that Catherine Ashton was just mentioning, is basically part of the offshore approach, which means that they will just try to address the symptoms rather than the root causes. The statelessness is still there. Poverty is still there. Youth, there are many unemployed youth in the country, and most important of all, there are weapons. And when you look at all of these things, I think it will be very difficult to just celebrate with just 10 ships, trying to combat piracy in the country. I think this is not the best way. And most important, when you look again, I mean, if you look at the efficiency of it, please, you can just, they say piracy costs $12 billion a year, all costs combined. If you just spend a fraction of that in building the state capacity in Somalia, I think piracy and all the other related conditions would have disappeared. But that is not the approach that they have chosen to take.
Okay, I want to ask you in a few moments about the legality of any EU operation on Somali soil. But first, Yusuf Omar Al-Azhari, we heard Will Geddes saying a few few moments ago that we're not just talking about a ragtag gang of ne'er-do-wells here. We're talking about well-organized, well-trained criminals. Who are they? Are they affiliated to Al-Shabaab or Al-Qaeda? How does the ransom money that they gain from their operations get from the coast, if you like, to militants?
You know, I have really visited the areas where these people are operating, and those at the beginning, the fishermen at the beginning who have started this, were not there at all. Now who are there are the renegades and the radicals who really want to benefit from it, whom I call them the merchants of death. They don't care about Somalia, or they don't care about even the international maritime. All that they need is to enrich their pockets and to continue the instability in Somalia by helping anyone who will be a party to destabilize Somalia by giving them the ransom they receive, part of the ransoms they receive. For example, now the Al-Shabaab, you know, in Somalia we have kinship, what you call kinship, and many of these renegades who are now become pirates are now part of Al-Shabaab, because they unless they give them money and the country becomes stable and peaceful, then they wouldn't have the income they are generating now. And therefore these people should not be, should be contained and mercilessly and dealt with. I mean, really, otherwise the Somalia will never have stability. It will never have reconciliation.
Okay.
Of course, the first intention, I was one of the defenders of the fishermen in the beginning, but when I went there and saw it by my own eyes, who are these renegades who are running now the operation, I know that they are all criminals and murderers and merciless.
Well, Geddes, I see you nodding there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, I agree with the other
Pardon?
speaker completely on this. The issue here is that the transitional government has pretty much only control over Mogadishu. Al-Shabaab have pretty much the control of the rest of the country, and they are a very militant group. These individuals, obviously, that are benefiting and profiting from the ransoms, both of the ships and also the hostages, are investing into their own pockets. This is very much the case. So even if there were relief efforts to try to invest into the country, to try and create some sort of stability, that money is more likely to be exploited by Al-Shabaab, who have control of the country. So the only way this situation is going to get resolved is to go to the nub of the problem, and that is the pirate strongholds, and whether it be by sea, land or air operations, it's taking out those supply chains, it's taking out those weapon caches, and it's disabling the pirates from being able to launch their operations.
Afyare Elmi, the only way to deal with militants is to meet force with force.
Well, let me just respond to that question, that it's not about fighting piracy. I think it's about how to fight piracy and insecurity and extremism and all kinds of things. And here what I see is that what the policies that they have just employed is further weakening the state. And what we need is not that. We need to empower the state and strengthen it. And if you look at what is happening now, state should have a capacity to deal with all kinds of security issues. Now part of it has been outsourced to AMISOM, another part has been outsourced to the neighboring countries, and now also the piracy and all the maritime issues will be outsourced to Atlanta and others who are operating offshore. I think this will further weaken the Somali state, and when you have no state working, and by the way, when the state does not have monopoly over legitimate violence in the country, that what you get is all kinds of insecurity, whether it's extremism or piracy, or you name it. And that is where we're getting things wrong. Here, the source is lack of state, functioning state.
All right.
And that is where you should go if you want to address the problem. That's far more cheaper, that's far more effective, and that's how to go.
Okay. Afyare, I want to ask you about your opinion on the legality of any operation that might take place upon Somali soil. Of course, under a United Nations convention, it's perfectly legal for other nations to take action to protect their vessels at sea in Somali territorial waters. What about on land?
Well, I am not a lawyer, I'll have to admit, but as far as I understand, it seems that somehow they secured some form of a deal with the government, the TFG, and also maybe with the admission of the Security Council. So I think they have covered it themselves legally. Still, it's questionable the way they are approaching, but my sense is that they have tried to cover that. I'm more questioning the political aspect of it, the practical aspect of it, rather than just the legal aspect of it.
Yusuf Omar Al-Azhari, whose responsibility is it to deal with pirates if they're captured, if they're caught? Kenya has said it was willing, of course, to take them and try them. At first, it said it can't take any more. What happens to these men who are caught at sea? Is the international reluctance, perhaps, to take them on and try them and put them through the courts going to lead, perhaps, to a more violent end, shall we say, for them? It's easier in that way to kill them rather than to capture them.
Yes, of course, the Somali government is weak and we don't have established judiciary which could take care of this, which could judge these people. But we know that the International Court of Justice exists in Hague. And I think this is part of their duty, because this is not only a Somali problem, this is an international problem which concerns every ship and every maritime of the world. But of course I agree with Afyare on one thing, that any operation which is being done or undertaken in Somalia should be coordinated with the government, with the Somali government, which have already approved and accepted the decision of the foreign ministers of the EU, as well as many sectors of Somalia do support this. But what we are afraid of is that to kill innocent people while not knowing who, not differentiating between the pirates and the indigenous people who live in the villages, and kill some of those innocent people, that will be, of course, a very, very big mistake. But what we want is a coordination to a certain extent with the present federal government, no matter how weak it is, to suggest or even to add some people to this operation who will guide them to the right places and to what to do. But eradicating these people is absolutely a must.
Well, Geddes, as far as you're aware, what's the point of Atalanta? Is it to kill or to capture and bring to justice these pirates? And I want to ask you, what do you think might happen if the pirates change their tactics and relocate their logistical hubs and camps further inland and do indeed melt into the civilian population? Isn't that going to lead to a risk of civilian casualties?
I think certainly in terms of Operation Atalanta, it is to try and purge this situation and this problem rather than to actually directly look at fatalities from the pirate side. It's obviously to prevent and to, sorry, not purge, to curb the operations by the pirates. In terms of the specific missions, whether that be to identify supply routes, weapon caches, strongholds, launching points, etc., that will be based off a lot of intelligence-led information and files and various information that would have been gathered, not only obviously by the actual naval operations themselves, but also by local assets and contacts within country. We know that there have been special forces operations, both knowingly and also covertly, along the borders of Somalia, particularly where there have been issues with the pirates obviously stretching their operations. A lot of this close target reconnaissance is also to benefit the minimizing of civilian casualties as well in any strikes that may subsequently happen. So although, yes, it is important to work with obviously the transitional government to coordinate in terms of those missions being implemented, it's going to be more really in terms of information and intelligence gathering to ensure that any of those strikes are going to be successful, directly against the pirates and also to minimize civilian casualties.
Afyare Elmi, piracy is a problem. State building, as you described it, is going to take some time. Al-Shabaab is not going to stand idle. Are there fears that they may change tactics? How do you address that problem if that arises?
Well, state building has to start anyway, and what I'm really sorry to say is that it hasn't begun yet, and we have had about 10 years of transitional governments, so there's nothing to show for it for that length of time, and we're going towards that direction, and that's very unfortunate. I'm not under the illusion that Operation Atalanta would end piracy. I believe if anything is to work, it has to start onshore, and it has to start, Somalia's state must start functioning. If that doesn't happen, I think pirates will get one way or another, or extremists, or you name it, will get a way to either melt within the population, or hide and then relaunch. It's just going to be cyclical as it used to be. One time it declines, other time it just skyrockets, and that's what's going to happen. I'm sorry to say that. As far as I am concerned, the source of the problem was the statelessness, and that has to be dealt with. All other things are just basically addressing the symptoms, not the root causes.
Will Geddes, will piracy off the coast of Somalia ever be fully eradicated? And the potential rewards from a single act of piracy must be equivalent to winning the lottery for an ordinary Somali, mustn't they?
Oh, absolutely. And in terms of the ransoms that have been settled, and obviously you've mentioned a couple of cases and examples earlier in this program, you're not going to eradicate the problem entirely, but what we will do, or hopefully what will happen with Operation Atalanta, and certainly with its increased and enhanced remit, is to actually look at the much more organized structure running out of Haradira and various other sort of coastal towns where the pirates have very much their strongholds. They're running a very professional operation in many respects. I think, as the other guest was saying, the problem fundamentally of the lack of control by the transitional government and the lack of any infrastructure politically means that there's a very, very long road ahead. However, Operation Atalanta should try, certainly in many respects with this enhanced remit, to minimize the chances of these piracy operations being launched from shore, albeit they may push the problem more internally into the country.
Yusuf Omar Al-Azhari, if the waters off Somalia become safer, what happens to the nation's fishing grounds? Who will protect local Somali fishermen's rights?
Well, the government is now ending the transitional period, and there will be a government, a real government, which is elected and operating. And I would say that the EU and the international community should try to accelerate the trainings and the assistance to this Somali government, which is going to be established after 22nd of August, and at the same time train Somalis to find out and to chase and search for those who will melt into the population, because Somalis know each other very well, and anybody who comes into and melt into the population would be known. And therefore we need a program of training for the Somalis in order to cope with the with this situation.
Final word from Afyare Elmi. We're very short on time, Afyare. Are you concerned that if Somali waters become safer, we'll be back where we started, that so-called super trawlers, international super trawlers, will once again damage the livelihoods of local Somalis?
Well, that must be addressed, by the way. Illegal fishing and toxic waste dumping. Somalis, by the way, have a serious concern with what has been happening. As of now, even Operation Atalanta is not interested in looking into it, and it has been the case for some time. It's not just chasing the pirate who's trying to at least hijack a ship, but it's also about the resources of the nation, which loses about $400 million to $500 million every year, and I think that must be taken into account. But most important of all, I hope that,
Sorry.
by the way, I mean, just one point, that training Coastal Guard will not take more than a year if the will is there. And I hope the will be there.
We've got to stop there. Many thanks indeed, Afyare Elmi. Thank you to all of our guests in Nairobi, Yusuf Omar Al-Azhari, in London, Will Geddes, and of course here in Doha, Afyare Elmi, and thank you very much indeed for being with us on this edition of Inside Story. Send us your feedback, as always, our email address, insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. From me, Adrian Finnegan in Doha. I'll see you again. Bye for now.